Okay, so what are we doing today? I am going to look at a piece that a friend sent in, and she wanted some feedback. She wanted me to go over some things, so I'm gonna look at it. So there's really not that much I can say about this because it's a really great piece. It's a fan art piece. The characters are recognizable. It expresses the emotions that you want to express. It looks cohesive. It works. I know this might be a very counterproductive point for me to take because I am doing feedback videos and you guys want feedback and you're gonna get some feedback, but I also want to make it very clear that I don't really support an obsession with getting better or fixing your drawings or paintings. There's nothing to fix here. And of course, my reaction to this is also gonna kind of depend on what you want to do with your work. For example, I work professionally as an artist, so I have different things that I pay attention to with my artwork. My artwork gets printed, usually in very small sizes on cards for board games and stuff like that. So I have a very clear goal in mind, a very clear ambition of how my pieces need to look to be very successful in the field that I work in. So there's a clear definition of what successful means in my field of work. But if you're a hobbyist and you draw because we're having a lot of fucking fun doing it, you don't have to adhere to the same standards and you don't always have to finish a piece and then look at it and go, okay, what can I improve? Improve what? Of course, we can do many, many different things to make our artworks look aesthetically pleasing, but art doesn't always have to be aesthetically pleasing. It doesn't always have to be anatomically correct. It doesn't have to have the perfect colors or the greatest value scheme or whatever bullshit. If it works for you, it works for you. And this piece doesn't only work for you, it also works for me. So that's a very long rant that I wanted to get out of the way because I really, really don't ever want anyone watching this to be losing the fun that you have while drawing. I really want you to draw whatever you want without thinking too much about the fundamentals. If this is not something you genuinely want to do as a profession and that you kind of want to improve because you're fucking obsessed with art, which is kind of how I got into this whole thing. I didn't even want it to be a professional artist. I was just so fucking obsessed with art that I really started to pay attention to learning fundamentals, learning anatomy and all that kind of stuff. And then I kind of randomly got into art and got stuck in this profession, and I'm really glad I did. But if that's not you, don't do it. Okay. That is my rant for today. This is a fucking great piece. Sorry for swearing so much, but it is. It's really good. But upon asking my friend what exactly it is that is bothering her about this fucking masterpiece, she said that to her it feels busy and she doesn't really know where to look first. And that is a very precise problem that we can talk about. I personally kind of disagree with this, to be honest. I think it's pretty clear what's happening in this piece. But there are definitely things that I could teach you, fundamentals that I can touch upon that would maybe help you for the next piece to make better decisions, to make things even more clear. So that's what I'm going to do. So what I'm going to do now is look at your piece from the standpoint of someone who does this professionally, and I'm going to judge this on a professional basis because that's what you wanted me to do, okay? So I'm going to put on my art director glasses. There we go. So I'm just going to pretend this is going to be for some sort of professional product, a professional product. And I'm your art director, and we want to bring this thing onto a standard that's fit for a client. And then my battery gave out. Sorry, by the way, if there's still a little bit of an echo in here. I have recently moved, hence the chaos that you can't even see. I'm hiding it well, but I'm looking into getting some curtains and stuff that will kind of reduce the echo in here because the walls are quite high in this room. Anyways, if I were to look at this piece from a critical perspective, from someone who wants this to be on a professional level in the field that I work in, because that's the only thing I can really talk about, I would look at three main things. So we're going to talk about three main fundamentals today. The first one would be colors. The second one will be composition. And the third one, values. So I'm not going to touch on colors too much with your piece because I honestly think it's working very well in the color department. Because these are characters from an animated TV show, the character designers already did a great job at creating a cohesive color palette for these characters. They work on their own, they work together. It makes a lot of sense, and you translated that very well into your own piece. So there's really not much that I can say about colors. They work. That's it. Secondly, let's talk about composition. Composition is a tool that we can use to make sure the viewer looks exactly where we want them to look. We want them to look where the emotional impact is, or where the message is, the meaning, whatever it is that we want to express. That's where we want them to look first. And we can use composition to help guide the eye to where exactly we want them to look. And this is something that you mentioned you struggled with in this piece. I personally disagree. Again, I think you did very well. This whole video is just gonna be like, you are wrong, this is great. Okay, let's talk about composition. First of all, the fundamentals of composition. So in composition, there are certain guidelines that we can use, like a template that we can basically copy every time we draw something to make sure it works. So something like that would be, for example, a center composition. So that would be one guideline to use. Another one would be the rule of thirds, which means you basically break down your piece into these thirds. And then you place your focal points wherever the lines meet. So for example, this could be a focal point here. This could be a focal point. This could be a focal point. This could be a focal point. But generally, if you put your focal point on one of these intersections, it will already help to emphasize that this is the focal point. Next one would be to make use of the golden ratio. Actually, art has a lot to do with physics and mathematics. And this is something, as an artist, you probably don't like to hear, but it's true. So there are things like the Fibonacci sequence, for example, that you can also use in art. Don't worry, you do not have to learn the sequence, but just so you know where it comes from, if you use the Fibonacci sequence to create a grid, for example, you get the golden ratio grid, which looks like this. Same principle, wherever these lines meet is where you could put your focal point and it would work. You could also put it in the middle here, for example, but just using this as a general guideline is already really helpful. And then talking of the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio, we also have the Fibonacci spiral, which I love using a lot. I love this thing, so helpful. And you can use it like this, you can flip it, you can angle it however you need to. But generally how this would work is you place the focal point kind of around this spirally area here, and then other elements in your piece should kind of be placed along this line, leading the eye in this kind of circle. So what you could do is take one of those grids and overlay it on your sketch when you're sketching, and then make sure your sketch kind of aligns with this. Looking at your piece, your character is pretty much in the middle of the image, maybe like this, and then where's the other middle? Maybe here. So you're already very successfully using a center composition. Your one main character is on that center line, and the other character kind of comes into that intersection of the two lines. So this is where the eye naturally would fall when looking at this. And what I think you're also doing successfully is kind of using other elements, other compositional elements to lead the eye toward the focal point, which in my opinion, this would kind of be the focal point. His facial expression and then hers kind of tells you the whole story. You don't even have to look at this arrow. You can already tell what's going on from looking at this point. So what you're doing is using other elements, like for example, these wings go in like that. Why am I using my mouse for this? So these wings would go in like this, like this. These already lead the eye toward this focal point. Her horns go like this. These light wing parts go like this. You can always add more if you want to. You could make sure that this arrow goes in a direction that leads more toward the characters and not so much away. You could have these arrows, light spear things go more like this to lead more toward his face. But not every element in this piece needs to point at the focal point. That can also get redundant very quickly, and you don't have to overuse this technique to make sure your focal point reads. Another really nice thing that you're doing is using this circle element to frame the character. This is a very, very common technique in art, and it's common because it works. What you're doing by adding a circular element is basically saying, look at this. I framed this because this is important. This is his face. Look at it. So again, compositionally, this works. I don't know what else to tell you. It works. If you wanted to use another compositional technique, for example, the Fibonacci spiral, the Fibonacci spiral would go something like this. This is a square aspect ratio, and the Fibonacci spiral is not really meant to be on a square aspect ratio, so keep that in mind. But technically it would look something like this. You could actually use this as well to lead the eye. I think if this arrow here that's piercing her would slightly go more into this direction, maybe have a very, very slight curve, it could already help. And then you would need some other elements, maybe in the foreground here, maybe, you know, maybe another of those light arrows here and here to kind of lead along this. I don't know, it could be leaves in the wind, it could be some sort of debris, it could be sparkles, it could be whatever is, you know, relevant to the scene and makes sense in your scene. So that's how you could add another compositional element on top of that if you want even more clarity on where the focal point is just through composition. But I think using just the center composition like you used here, it works, she said for the 100th time in this video. Now let's talk about values. I think this is the point that you could benefit from the most, because, sorry, looking outside because my neighbor was looking like straight at me through the window. Yeah, so my camera cut out, so I'm gonna use this really fucking crappy webcam. Sorry about that. Okay, let's finally talk about values. So values are kind of my favorite thing to think about when I paint, because they're very important in what I do, which is for work. I often create things that are going to be printed at a pretty small size. It has to be readable from a small size or far away, and values can really help you get that visual clarity that you need for things to be reading at that size. Now, your piece, it's not necessarily meant to be looked at from afar, but since you have been saying that this kind of still looks too busy for you, I think learning about values and how you can group them to create more harmony and cohesion could maybe help you. So I'm going to touch on that. Let me give you my very, very quick rundown of values. So what exactly are values? Values describe the lightness or darkness of a piece or a color. So if you look at our color picker, color wheel, whatever, each color will have a value. A light blue will have a light value. A dark blue will have a dark value. White is a light value. Black is a dark value. Going from white to black, we have a scale, right? If I go like this, the scale goes down all the way. So we could look at value like this scale. This is the Denman-Ross scale. You do not have to remember this term, but this is what it's called. And obviously the steps from white to black could be thousands of steps in between here. But Denman-Ross just said, let's have 9 steps. Why not? So this is usually a scale that you will come across very often when you learn about art fundamentals. It's just a way to visualize that there's steps when you go from pure white to pure black, and it is a scale. So typically when we paint a piece, you will find all of these values in your painting. If I look at your piece in black and white, we can see pretty much all of these values. I can even put the values scale on top of here. We can find all of these values in your piece. There's pure white here, there's pure black here and here, you know, all of these things all here. And that's good, that's fine, that's dandy. But what we can utilize is something that we call value grouping. So what that means is that we limit the values that we put in a certain place. Sounds complicated, it really is not. So what would a value group look like? So grouping values would mean, for example, saying I'm only gonna use, let's say, these 3 values for painting a certain character. Or I'm only going to use all of these values, but not pure white and pure black. That's what grouping means. It basically means I will choose a group of values and I will adhere to these values and I will not go outside of this group. We still want to use all of the values in our piece, but we will make more deliberate choices which values we use where and how many of them, if that makes any sense. And by the way, any of this is also personal choice. I know artists who, for example, never use pure white or pure black in their pieces, and that's totally fine. It's a personal choice. It comes down to style, it comes down to preference. But that would also be value grouping. They make the very conscious decisions to only use colors that fall in between pure white and pure black. If you look at your piece, your values are basically everywhere. This black is here, but this black is also here and here and here, and it's kind of even at the top here. It's this line here. The white, the pure white is here, it's here, it's here, it's here, it's here, it's here, it's here. You know, it's kind of everywhere. What we want to do now is be like, okay, what if I only use white in a certain space? And how do I decide where I want that? Is usually, that's how I choose it, is going by where do I want the most contrast. Think about it this way. Wherever there's contrast is where I, as the viewer, will look. So how would that practically look like? If this is your area of interest, the focal point, you want the highest amount of contrast. So you want to use this entire value scale. You want to go from the lightest light color to the darkest dark color that you want to use in this piece. It could mean pure white and pure black. It could also mean going from a very bright red to a very dark red. It doesn't have to be pure white or pure black. But generally you want to use the whole scale in your area of contrast. And then in the area that is not your area of contrast, so all of this, we only want to use, let's say, maybe these three values, right? Or these three values, or these three values. So I'm gonna try to show you practically what I mean by messing a little bit with this drawing, so that it hopefully makes a little bit more sense to you by showing you what I mean. But this is usually not something that I would do after the fact. This is definitely something that you need to think about while you're drawing and while you're choosing your colors. I'm gonna make a very rough selection here now, because I want the characters to pop, because they are the focal point. This is going to be the worst selection that you've ever seen. I'm going to make a new layer and cut the characters out, so now it's just the characters. So they're separate from the background. Okay, so if we look at this weird thing here, it kind of looks overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. Just look at this. This is our value scale right here. It has a few more steps than the scale that I showed you before, but it's basically the same principle. Here you have your darkest dark, your black on the left and the white on the right. And what I'm going to do is push both of these thingamabobs to the middle, which means I will get rid of the darkest darks and the lightest lights. As you can see, I do this, it gets lighter. If I do this, it gets darker. And we want to move both, because we want to get rid of the high highs and the low lows. So we want it to sit like more in the middle. This would be a really extreme example. Obviously we don't want it to be this extreme, but that's technically how this works. And again, you never want to do this thing in post. You always want to think about your values while you choose your colors, because this honestly doesn't look very good when you do it in post, but just for the sake of this video, I'm just going to do it like this. So we took out a lot of the contrast. Now I wouldn't keep it like this. We did take out contrast in this area, but the contrast between the foreground and the background kind of got mushy a little bit. So personally I would probably just darken the background again a little bit. But if I darken it now, I will not create more contrast between the values that are in the background. I will only create more contrast between the background and the foreground, which are the characters, so that it looks more like it used to look before. Again, very quick thing, don't do this to your piece. You know, I would, again, not necessarily do this to this piece, because this piece already works for what it is. But if you wanted to, you could do something like this. Obviously, you can always then go in and make sure the background and the foreground characters are more integrated with each other, but there is now a clear separation between the background and the foreground, and therefore it just visually reads easier. Again, not every piece needs this. I don't think this piece needs this. I think this piece benefits from the very high contrast that you have, because the compositional things that you did are already telling us where we need to look, so you don't necessarily need to think about values too much for this piece. But there might be a piece in the future that you're working on where it could benefit from a clearer separation and more of a grouping of values. So again, to summarize what we did, we look at the value scale now in black and white. You can tell that the main characters who are in focus have the whole value scheme from very light to very dark, whereas the background only utilizes maybe these. Yeah, and that's it. That's my very, very quick and hopefully a little bit comprehensive course on values. Okay, let's summarize again. If I were to look at this piece from the standpoint of someone who is giving you a job or who's preparing you to do a job, then I would look at things like composition, colors, and value. And obviously I touched on these things very quickly and like very on a surface level, and this might have gone completely over your head, or maybe not, and that's fine. And I'm not saying, like, you know, ideally next time you work on a piece you want to think about composition, colors, and values, but that might be overwhelming pretty fast. I know it definitely was for me when I started to think about these kind of things. I started by thinking maybe about one of those things. Maybe I started, you know, just thinking about how can I make sure the composition works, and then disregard the other two and kind of more do things that feel right to me, but maybe not really thinking about the rules behind that. You already have a very good grasp on a lot of the fundamentals just from feeling, so you really don't need to worry that much about it. But if you're interested in learning more about these fundamentals, this would be a great way to start, to either think about composition, color, or values. I didn't even touch on colors today, but you know. So yeah, I hope this helped. I'm sorry I didn't really give you an overpainting or anything, because I really genuinely think your piece works, and I think you needed more of a pep talk than actual advice. So you're doing very, very well. If any of you are watching this and you're interested in learning more about these fundamentals that I touched on, please let me know in the comments, and I'm happy to do longer videos about this where I really go into detail. And if you want me to give feedback on your piece, or there's something that you need advice on, just let me know. I will make a video about it. I'm always happy to do that for you. Always looking for things that I can make videos about. So please let me know what you want from me, and I'll do it. It's as easy as that. Yeah, check out my friend. I will put all of her stuff in the description as always. Please give a like, a follow. Yup. Bye.